Okay, so today I'm going to be doing my first review for my first video review for Zero Dark 30, and I'm going to show you the trailer, and then I'll come back and talk a little bit about my thoughts and my take on the movie in general. I will talk a little bit about the controversy that's been surrounding the film, but I'm not going to spend too much time talking about that because there's already more than enough that's been written and more than enough that's been said about it. I may and probably will talk a little bit about the controversy in terms of what that actually means in relation to the way that we look at and talk about film. So less than the things that seem to be pretty controversial about the film. So here's the trailer, and we'll be back in a second.
We're spending billions of dollars. We are still no closer to defeating our enemy.
20 detainees recognize that photo.
No birth certificate, no cell phone, you guys are a ghost.
He's right in the inner circle.
The whole world's gonna win in on this.
I want targets.
Where was the last time you saw Bin Laden?
Oh my God, is that what I think it is?
Where was the last time you saw Bin Laden?
So Zero Dark 30 is a very well-made film all around. The narrative is very tight, and it sticks basically to Jessica Chastain's story and following her character Maya from the beginning to the end. And it's just basically about her journey through this manhunt. And Jessica Chastain is amazing, absolutely amazing. She gives an incredible performance. Jason Clarke was also definitely worthy of note. You know, he was great. A very different character than Jessica Chastain's. There's kind of, as the film progresses, there's some kind of their characters kind of, their perspectives kind of come together a little bit more than where they are at the beginning of the film. And you know, they're basically your two main leads in the film, and they were both incredible, just absolutely phenomenal. The film is really, really tight. There's no kind of extraneous moments. It moves along very well, and there was never a point. It's about 2 hours long, but there was still never a point during the film where I was kind of trying to figure out when this was going to end and feeling like it was maybe going overly long. So that is always good, especially with something that is a suspense film or a thriller and relies that much on holding the tension and holding the viewer, being compelling and engaging. And I think Zero Dark 30 as a film succeeds in all of that. It's really engaging. It really holds the viewer, the audience, quite well throughout the entire thing. The cinematography was also, and the design, the combination of the cinematography and the design were excellent. You know, it's just, in a way, it has a kind of beauty to it. And I think that's something that with films like this that is often overlooked anyway, because of the subject matter, because of the controversy, which I'll get into a little bit. There's been very, very little, I haven't seen very much in the way of people talking about the fact that the film is absolutely gorgeous in the way that it's presented, and the visual presentation is outstanding. So that's something that's definitely worth mentioning. If you like good cinematography and good design, this is definitely a film that you should check out and that you'd be interested in. I don't think that you would be disappointed by that aspect of the film at all. I think if there is one thing about the film that could be possibly you could see as a failing or a shortfall anyway, maybe not quite a failing, is that it is such a singular narrative. It's so narrow in its perspective that it's not. It doesn't really show very much or talk very much about the controversy surrounding, or even the situation surrounding the hunt for Osama bin Laden beyond this one person. And it sticks throughout the whole thing to following Jessica Chastain and her efforts as a CIA agent to find Osama bin Laden. So there's very, very little. There's a little bit of there's one particular scene where it kind of references, or at least makes available, the idea that there's some controversy surrounding the way that this manhunt has been executed. So, in that way, maybe possibly they could have gone with a little bit more than that, but that's a kind of storytelling decision, and that's a screenwriter and director's decision. That's something that they decided to do. They wanted to stick with one very singular, narrow story about one character. And as a film, and as that narrative is concerned, it's excellent. It holds together extremely well, and it does a great job of building Jessica Chastain's character and also Jason Clarke's character. It does a great job of building those characters and depicting what their journey is. So in that way, it's extremely successful. And if that is specifically what you're looking for when you're going to the movies, when you're going to see a film of any kind, if you're just kind of looking for a story that's going to be well told and presented in a way that is appealing or engaging, compelling, then there is nothing really to dislike about Zero Dark 30. It's an extremely well-made film. I am happy to see Catherine Bigelow getting as much acclaim for the film as she is, if for no other reason than it's good to see another female filmmaker, female director succeeding. We haven't really seen very much of those in recent years, and it's just something that's good to have. It should, filmmaking being storytelling, it's always nice to have as many perspectives as possible being represented, and the degree to which there are so few female filmmakers, that's a voice that's kind of missing in the perspective, in the way that people make choices in their storytelling. So that stuff is all, as a film, Zero Dark 30 is really compelling. It's definitely well done. It's not something that I ever felt was a waste of time or was wasting any of my time. And so, being that essentially the way that I go about looking at films is asking whether or not they accomplish what they are presenting to the audience as what they're attempting to say. I don't know if that makes any sense, but or attempting to do. What are they able to provoke in the audience? The reaction that they're attempting to react, or they're attempting to provoke. Are they able to make the story that they're trying to tell interesting and compelling? And Zero Dark 30 as a film succeeds extremely well in all of those categories. So that's just kind of the film itself, the performances. Again, Jason Clarke and Jessica Chastain are excellent, just really, really, really great. And as I'm actually recording this, it's the weekend that Arnold Schwarzenegger's new movie, The Last Stand, is being released. And it's interesting to note that it is failing miserably, apparently. And the number one and number two films in the country right now are Mama, which is a horror film that I'll be doing a review of later, starring Jessica Chastain. And the number two movie is Zero Dark 30, starring Jessica Chastain. So it is definitely interesting. If you're at all interested in the business of the film industry, it's interesting to note that right now Jessica Chastain is wiping the floor with Arnold Schwarzenegger so far as box office returns are concerned. And that definitely suggests that there has been some shift in the way that the audience views movies and the way that the audience, what movies the audience is interested in. So beyond all of that, there's the controversy that's surrounding Zero Dark 30. And it's interesting considering it, having seen the film now, considering it from the perspective that there seem to be two camps that are warring over what this movie is about, and they, what it's saying and all of these things. There's the controversy essentially comes down to the fact that there are a lot of people who feel like Zero Dark 30 is glorifying torture. And being someone who really doesn't think that torture, or what have been euphemistically called what are they calling them? Enhanced interrogation techniques. I having seen the movie, I don't think it really portrays that. I think it could come down either way, and that's one of the interesting things about it. Having now seen it and looking at all of this controversy, at the end of the day, you could come out of that film and say that it glorifies torture, or you could come out of the film and also say, which is part of what the controversy is, that torture or enhanced interrogation does not provide useful information. And there's going to be some spoilers as I'm talking about this particular aspect of it. So if you're not, if you're interested in seeing the movie and you don't want to be spoiled, then there you go. You should probably check out and come back later. As it pertains to this one very singular aspect of a story that really is not at all interested in that, I don't think it comes down either way. The beginning of the film opens with a scene where Jason Clarke's character is in the midst of interrogating a prisoner. And it's definitely torture, there's no question about that. But the way that continues, and based on the information that they get from him, really nothing comes of it. All they really get is 5 years of dead-end investigations, essentially. So what eventually becomes useful information comes from a much more tried and true kind of intelligence world. It comes from just a much older way of doing things, which is there had been intelligence shared by another country, and there had just been so much intelligence following 9/11 that this had gotten stuck in essentially a pile that they didn't have the manpower to completely sift through. So it had been sitting in there. So 5 years later, when they finally find it, they pull it out. And that's the thing that kind of begins to really roll and develop some leads for them as far as finding Osama bin Laden. So you could really read the film either way, because they get the right name from this guy, but they don't get anything, what that turns into for them is not any kind of, it doesn't produce any results. 20 minutes later, they get intelligence from another prisoner that says that this guy's dead, and that turns out to be wrong. So, it doesn't really come down either way on that particular aspect of the story, or it's not making an argument about enhanced interrogation one way or the other. It's not saying that torture is useful. It's not saying that torture is not useful. This is an aspect of the story. And that's something else that I'm going to get into in a minute. But, just kind of from an objective perspective, and being someone who does not necessarily expect a film to take a stand one way or the other, I went in and, with as open a mind as I could possibly have. And, coming out of it, I don't think it really says anything one way or the other. I think that all of that controversy is, the film is kind of getting stuck in the controversy that existed prior to its own existence. And those are perspectives that people want to see. They want to believe that perspective is there anyway. So, yeah. But, that kind of does lead to another discussion and another question, which is about what can film actually do, and what as a culture are we and a society are we able to accept from film? And that's, to me, a really interesting discussion. And I also think there are aspects of this entire controversy that people aren't addressing that are worth talking about. And one of those is that we don't really expect narrative film specifically, especially, fiction, which is what this is. And yeah, it's based on true events and all that kind of stuff. But, Psycho was based on true events, and Texas Chainsaw Massacre was based on true events. So where the true events are and how well and how many of them are actually peppered throughout the story, you never really know. You can that's something that history is actually a much better judge of than it seems. Seems we're better able to judge those things in a past, looking at them from the as they're in the past, than we are looking at them as they're in the present. And I think that's something that in the future, the discussion about Zero Dark 30 will be better able to parse these things. And I don't think we're probably very able to have the kind of objective analysis related to the film and whether or not it is saying one thing or another, because there's still so much, we still have so much invested in the conversation. I don't think there's anything wrong with the fact that we have a lot invested in the conversation. I just think that most people are attempting to imbue the film with ideas and perspectives that it doesn't have. And I also have, I take certain exception with the idea that film needs to have one of those perspectives either way. I think that is essentially, at the end of the day, up to the storyteller. So some of it is going to be up to the director. Some of it's going to be up to the screenwriter. And that, at the end of the day, are their choices. And I don't think we can require one way or the other that they tell a story that takes a certain perspective on either one of them, whether it is that enhanced interrogation is useful and produces things that we need, which is one argument about this particular topic, or that it is terrible and produces nothing useful, which is the other side of the argument about this particular topic. I don't think it's the film's job. I don't think it's any film's job, unless it takes that job on itself. Unless through the way that they're telling the story, they decide that this is a responsibility that they want to put that idea out there and they want to make an argument for it. And if they want to do that, that is absolutely their right, and it could very well be an interesting film. But I don't think that attempting to require that, which is the way that some of this argument seems to go, is any good. I don't think it's useful, number one. And number two, I don't like the idea of seeing people, be it filmmakers or storytellers of any kind, being kind of having these ideas foisted on them, and kind of the idea that they should be forced one way or the other to take a stand on anything, on any issue. I don't mind when filmmakers do. Sometimes that makes for really compelling filmmaking. But I also don't think that it's necessarily something that they absolutely have to do. And the idea, at least a lot of discussion seems to center around the idea that they do have to do that. So, there's that aspect of it. Another aspect of it that's worth talking about is whether or not film can actually do any of those things. and how well it can do it, if it can do it at all. Especially with a film like this, where it's such a narrow perspective. It's just this one character. Throughout the entire film, from beginning to end, it's one character, it's from their perspective, and it's their story. I don't know that any of this is really germane. I think it's germane if the discussion is going to be about what does it take for a person to get to the point that they're willing to use enhanced interrogation. What does that mean for them as a person? And on those levels, those kind of really singular and narrow ways, I think that the film, there are definitely things that the film has to say about that. I don't think it has anything to say about it in the wider way that people are talking about it. And I think it's essentially a product of smoke and mirrors to that. It's a combination of, number one, smoke and mirrors, and number two, a lack of information that creates this kind of controversy around a movie, of all things. And I don't know that expecting a film to portray the degree of reality on either side that people are attempting to attribute to it is sensible. I don't think it's actually possible for a film to present that kind of reality. It is a representation of someone's perspective on a reality. In this case, being that the film is essentially fiction, and I'll get into why I'm saying that in a moment, but in the fact that it's fiction and it's not a documentary, number one, and number two, it's not like the film is presenting you with actual footage through the entire process of this manhunt. There's 10 years worth of information out there, and billions of dollars were spent on this manhunt. You could never boil all of that down into a 2-hour narrative that would be satisfying and make sense to people. And so I think that narrative film specifically makes, fiction, as opposed to documentaries, etc., is about something very different. And I think that's generally about being able to, I have always really loved the idea that fiction is telling lies about people who never existed in order to tell the truth about ourselves. And I think that's an interesting perspective, and I think if you're approaching the film from that perspective, there are definitely interesting conversations to have. But approaching it from the perspective that it either is presenting reality or isn't presenting reality is just kind of silly and nonsensical, because that's not what film does. Especially here, for us as a culture, that's not what we expect from a 2-hour, not even 2 hour, it doesn't really matter how long it is, but from a fictional perspective, or from narrative film in general. We do expect it to a certain degree from documentaries, but we don't expect it from this kind of film. So it's interesting to see the way that is being foisted on this film, and kind of troubling in a way. And I also think that some of that is due to a lack of other information. And I think that people are in their need or their desire to have information they don't have, because the mainstream media, as far as news is concerned, has been so horribly poor over the last probably 20 years. And because the government has been so secretive about a lot of this stuff, there's this gap in what we're able to know. And so when anything or anyone presents anything related to these things that we have these gaps of knowledge about, we want that knowledge so badly, and we want that information so badly, that if it doesn't present it, it actually highlights the fact that we don't have enough information. And I think that makes all of us very anxious, and especially kind of as a culture and in the cultural discussion, when you don't have the information that you need to have an informed discussion, you end up in places where people are just filling in what they want to be there. And I think as far as this film is concerned, that's definitely, a really big aspect of it, is people are just filling in what they already want to be there. Whether or not it's actually there in the film, doesn't really matter. And I do think that there's something to be said for the idea that secrecy is kind of breeding this kind of discontent and this distrust, and that is coming out in ways that I don't think everybody is really completely aware of. For a film to have this degree of intensity of discussion related to policy is interesting. I don't think you should be using a Hollywood production, or really any kind of narrative film at all, as a springboard for making policy, or even generally, I guess, even really talking about it. It's just not, it's just not designed that way. That's not what it does. So I don't think we're ready for that kind of film. And I don't think we would go see that kind of film. And I think that's something else that's often left out. And I think that a lot of people want the film industry and the audience and the kind of entire ecosystem that is film, or that surrounds film, to be something other than what it actually is at this point. And I understand that, and I don't completely disagree with all of the things that they're saying and all of the things that they feel like they want, and that this entire controversy highlights. But I also think that that is not a matter of expecting those things from a film that's already finished. You can't change, it's done. Like, you can't go back and remake. I guess you could go back and remake the film, I guess, which would be stupid and useless. But I think that's more an aspect of changing the audience and changing what the audience expects from film. And that's a much longer term project. That is not going to happen as a result of Zero Dark 30. And I don't think that Zero Dark 30 is the right film to use for that argument either, because it just is not, that's not what it's about. Those are things that or many people anyway, are attempting to superimpose on a film that has no interest in that subject and that isn't making a comment about that subject in itself. It may reflect something in the fact that in its existence and in the way it tells its story, but it's not about that. And I think that is that's something else altogether. I think there are films out there that do kind of deal with those ideas in their own way. If you look at Exit Through the Gift Shop, that really kind of deals with the way that we look at film and art and the kind of consumerization of those things in a way that's really interesting. I think even if you look at something like Cabin in the Woods, and even though it's kind of particularly talking about horror, that speaks very specifically to the way that the audience sees film, or horror films in that particular way, or in that particular instance anyway. And I think those films take a stance on those kinds of things, and they do it really well. And those are instances that you could use in a wider conversation to start having that conversation. But we're not having that conversation. And I think that is even more interesting than the conversation we are having about Zero Dark 30. And I don't think that in the discussion of policy related to torture, enhanced interrogation, whatever you want to call it, I don't think that a film that doesn't purport to be a documentary, it doesn't purport to show you anything other than a story, a version of a story. I don't think that this is the film to have that discussion about. I don't think that this film should in any way reflect the decisions that we make as a society or a culture about enhanced interrogation or torture. And I think that this is one of those things that turns people off from being able to have a real discussion about those kinds of subjects. And I think people get turned off because you can see in this discussion the kind of rapacious desire and lack of integrity that a lot of the people on both sides have. They're willing to use absolutely anything, whether it fits or not, whether it actually makes any sense, to be used as an example or a useful piece of information related to their argument. It doesn't seem to matter. They want their argument to win. They want their side to win, and they don't care whether or not it makes any sense, first of all. And second of all, they don't care what in the long term the process of making that decision leads to. And so from my own perspective, I can definitely say that there have been a few different films in the last period of year or so. I think they've probably all been released in 2012 that have had some kind of controversy surrounding them, not completely dissimilar to this, especially in tone and the mannerisms of it, that have kind of turned me off really completely to aspects and outlets of the kind of political dialogue that I hadn't been before, and it's really just because of how rapacious is the only word I can come up with, just how rapacious they are in their desire to be either proven or seen as right, and to see their perspective foisted on everyone else. And to that degree, it's troubling. It's really troubling, and I don't think that this particular film deserves all of that. It's a well-made film. If you don't like the subject matter, or the subject matter is troubling to you, that's one thing. But to say it is and does things that it really just doesn't, and that it has no interest in the long run, it is not a useful way to have a conversation about these things. And I think at the end of the day, that is really unattractive, but unattractive in a way which is, it turns people away from a conversation that they should be taking part in. And because these are decisions that, as a society and as a culture, if you're going to be a responsible member of society and a responsible member, participating member of, a democracy, then you should be informed about these things, and also be willing to articulate your opinions and your ideas that have come from that information in a way that can communicate to other people. And I don't think, and I think what this entire controversy does is, I think it's discouraging that in the way that it's being done, and the fact that it's being done from a perspective that it really doesn't belong in. This is not the place for that, I don't think, anyway. I don't think this film, and I think it's specifically because this film doesn't really take a stand either way. And if it did, sure, then you could have that conversation. But I don't really think it does. That's not what it's about. It's about one particular person's journey. Now, if you want to blow that up and talk about how that specific journey and how the story itself relates to the way that enhanced interrogation and torture have an effect on us as a society and a culture, that's an acceptable conversation, but that's not necessarily the conversation we're having, or that's being had anyway in most outlets. So all in all, I really thought that Zero Dark 30 was a really good movie. I thought it was just really enjoyable, and I think it was a really compelling thriller. Not my favorite film of the year. I do think that Jessica Chastain gave one of the better performances that I've seen this year. That's definitely true. But, you know, overall, in certain ways, it's a kind of formulaic thriller. It's done really, really, really well, but it's still kind of a formulaic thriller. And there's nothing wrong with that when it's done as well as this is. But it's not, you know, as a film, it's kind of weird that all of this attention is being directed towards something that, from an artistic standpoint, as good as it is, it probably doesn't deserve quite this much attention, you know? So I think there are much better films that that have something really specific to say that we could be talking about, but we're not. And that kind of bothers me a little bit more. Is another thing that, when added into the rest of this controversy, kind of bothers me. There are some films that are actually, the filmmakers set out to say something, and they have a really very direct perspective, and we're not talking about those. We're talking about this and trying to say that it is something that it isn't, when there are plenty of other films that we could be talking about, and could be talking about the perspectives that they are taking and the points that they are trying to make. I recently saw Compliance. I've posted on a number of different social media sites about it repeatedly. That may have been my favorite film of last year, specifically because it says something very specifically about some things related to us as a culture and a society. And because it hasn't been in multiplexes nationwide, and because it's not directed by an Academy Award winner, then nobody is talking about what that has to say. And what it has to say, and it definitely is saying something, has been left out and isn't something that we're talking about very much, especially in comparison to what's going on with Zero Dark 30. And that's unfortunate. That's really unfortunate, because the two things are actually really deeply connected. The things that people are talking about related to Zero Dark 30 are really deeply related to what Compliance has to say. And those are things that we should be talking about. And if you want to talk about a film related to this entire other discussion around torture and enhanced interrogation and all of these things, Compliance, there's a window there to do that. Compliance definitely gives you a window to have that discussion. But instead of doing that with a film that wants to have a discussion and wants to be a part of that discussion, we're doing it with a film that didn't really have any interest in doing that. Now, I'm sure they understood that it was going to be controversial, but I don't think, and understanding that it was going to be controversial, I'm sure what they saw were dollar signs, because at the end of the day, that's what Hollywood is interested in. The people who put the money into these things want to get their money and more back. So that is also, that's a little bit frustrating. There are things out there, there are films out there that deserve to be discussed, and that are asking you to have these kinds of discussions, and we're not having them in relation to those films. We're having them in relation to this, which it's just not the right example, and it's not the right film to be having that discussion. So at the end of the day, that's my whole take on it. So thanks for watching, and I will be back with a review of Mama in the next few days. So I hope that you get to see something good in that period of time, and if you do, you can always get to me, or you can always reach me at any of the emails that I'll have posted with this video, or through my blog, where the video will be posted as well. So thanks a lot, and I hope you have a good few days.